In this episode, we are going to dive into what it means to have a brain-based approach to healing with Alyssa Chang. Alyssa is a brain-based health coach for women seeking a different approach to health and healing, so you can learn how to live a life designed with listening, attuning, and trusting your body's unique needs. With the health industry currently saturating the market with quick fix and cookie cutter approaches, Alyssa aims to challenge these norms. With over 10 years studying neuroscience, she works with clients on improving their connection between their brain and body so they can heal their metabolism, rewire their mindset, and move pain-free. Through partnerships with her clients, Alyssa develops programs that create sustainable lifestyle shifts and interrupt seemingly never-ending searches for new solutions. She trusts you as the expert and serves as your guide on this journey back home to your body. Which I'm like, oh, even just reading your bio, Alyssa, just gives me all the feels. So I'm so happy that you're here with me today. And I'm excited to share you with my community and my audience.
I'm so honored.
So, do you want to go into your own kind of like healing journey? And I think a lot of people are going to relate to it. And then how that kind of morphed into focusing on a brain based approach to healing.
Yeah, definitely. So, I grew up as an athlete. So I played volleyball, trained very intensely to perform really well. I played volleyball and I'm only 5'4", so it meant that I had to train myself to be very fast and agile because I lacked the height. So I was that person that would, stay at the gym later after practice, be really early to practice, and, kind of this innate desire and drive to just do really well. And after I graduated and finished playing, there was this big void in, if I'm not training to be an athlete, like what am I training for? And in that space, I kind of had this weird identity crisis of like, oh my God, if I'm not an athlete, like who am I? And I had a friend that recommended or just kind of asked if I heard about figure competitions. And I didn't know what figure competitions were. So I went home and I Googled it. And, your screen populates with all these like, very fit, lean, perceivably very happy competitors. And I was like, wow, like that is something that would definitely challenge me, right? Meet kind of that athlete mentality of like pushing and performing and all of that. So I ended up training for these figure competitions. And figure competitions really are this perfection of how you're eating, how you're training, sleeping. It was very, very intense. And after a year of competing, I ended up damaging, quote unquote, damaging my metabolism. And it's something that's very common a lot of figure competitors experience because of the prolonged calorie deficit, the extreme intense exercise. So I exited that year of competing with a host of ailments: depression, anxiety, binge eating, leaky gut syndrome. I had rapid weight gain of roughly about 65 pounds in the 6 months post competing. Lost my period. I was very withdrawn and had a lot of pain. And so I kept trying to step back into healing my body through traditional methods of eat less, do more, kind of just the mentality I had, yet I kept getting sicker. So that's where like the neuroscience approach kind of fell into my lap through a mentor. And as I started to learn more about the neuroscience approach to really trusting your body and yourself as the guide, it really helped dismantle the ways that we're led to believe that we should train our bodies or feed our bodies. And so neuroscience really helped pave a much more sustainable path towards like being in that trusting, intuitive relationship with yourself.
That must have been really hard going from like this state of like a perfect physique basically that you achieve through like training for figure and then like and feeling like I'm the epitome of health, right? Like that like when we look like that on the outside, you can like you think you're healthy and that's what we in society associate with health. Like weight loss, looking a certain way, and then having that extreme of like, I mean, 60 plus pounds, that's a lot. And you're like a petite person. So I'm sure that that was like really traumatic mentally. Was it hard when you found the neuroscience stuff, or were you like, this is it? Like, this is definitely for me?
Um, I think I was just like hopeful because at that point I was exhausting a lot of, again, that the traditional approaches of like, okay, if I wanted to get out of pain, well, then I'll do the foam rolling, I'll do the acupuncture, I'll do like all the things. And I was just like, my pain would just move somewhere else. And then when I was trying to restrict my calories, my body would rebel and I would just gain more weight. So I
Okay.
think when I started to learn about neuroscience and this brain-based approach, I was like, okay, this is kind of like my last hopeful, effort in making sense of everything I'm going through. And it just made sense. And so I was willing to like step into it and learn more about it. But I was very cautious. And I think a lot of the, students that work with me are also in a very similar position where they are in a place of like hopefulness, but then also with so much failed experiments, they're, really unsure if this is actually going to work.
Yeah. No, I think that because I can imagine so many people listening to this and feeling in a similar situation, especially if they've
Mhm.
tried different approaches to working on whatever those like main health concerns are, probably something to do with hormones. So I was just like curious because I'm like that's rough. That's a lot like mentally and physically to be dealing with at once. But I do feel like the brain based stuff does make sense. So
Yeah.
I feel like I could like totally see that like resonating. Like once you learn a little bit, you're like, oh, okay, like this totally makes sense and like kind of clicks. So when you
Yeah.
say like brain-based approach to healing, like what does it mean? Like what do you do?
Yeah. What do I do? So, as you shared, I've been studying neuroscience for 10 years. So I was introduced to this certification that basically unpacks the different structures of the nervous system and their independent responsibilities of what makes us feel safe in the world, the subsequent behaviors we create by all, these the way that your brain is hardwired to basically work for you. Um, so as I learned more about these different structures, again, it helped make sense of like these unique symptoms I was manifesting. So what I utilize is looking at everything from this nervous system perspective, with the understanding that our brain and body are always trying to orient us more towards safety and survival. So as I was rebounding and like struggling with everything that I was experiencing symptom wise, I had to kind of take this bird's eye view and ask myself a very simple question of like, where is it that I might be feeling unsafe? Why is my body really rebelling against any type of weight loss protocol? Why was I feeling so tired? What was my anxiety trying to teach me? And so all of my symptoms were really windows into much deeper needs by my nervous system and what I actually needed to heal, or the protocols that I needed to heal, were going to be very, very different from the protocols that made me sick. And I think that that's something that in my work, a lot of my students are learning how to dismantle like traditional fitness and health culture beliefs around, no pain, no gain, just push through, grind, whereas this kind of brain-based approach is looking at, well, what if we just do less and that actually equals more? What if we find a more effective path that doesn't occupy hours at the gym? What if we utilize pain as a redirect to help us better understand what your needs might be? So it's a much more compassionate approach that's rooted in science, that allows people to feel more normalized in their bodies after spending probably months, if not years, really feeling very confused, reaching a lot of dead ends, and feeling very alone in how they exist in their body.
I love that, and I love how you talk about, like, using that communication and signs from your body to kinda go through, like, well, what could this be giving you some insight to that you might
Mhm.
possibly need instead of I just think it's really easy to look at things as symptoms and be, like as a negative thing, and then
Mm.
and almost like be trying to fix it, like whereas it's like, okay, but what if these behaviors or whatever or symptoms or whatever is kind of however it's manifesting for you, what if that's actually your body trying to say like, hey, I actually need a little bit more of this or that. And I'm sure that's something I believe that you've talked about. I know you have some great Instagram posts on it. But with your clients as well. And like what things do you see for them that they might look at and want to like fix it or maybe see it as an issue? And how could that show up? Like I think of like weight gain, right? Is like a huge one for someone.
Right.
Like what could that maybe be telling them?
Yeah, like weight gain, from my personal story, what I've often seen with a lot of my students is that weight is merely like your brain's best option to help keep you safe. And as I mentioned, the nervous system's main goal is keeping us safe and alive. So if I was enduring like a year plus of extreme calorie restriction, I was basically in a place of starvation mode, which is your body is just in high conservation. It perceives a ton of threat, a ton of stress. So your brain is basically saying, well, there's something super stressful happening around Alyssa. And my best option right now is to create as much insulation around all of her vital organs to protect her. So we often will notice that we gain weight in certain areas of our body that might be high, what I call threat zones, meaning, some people maybe carry more weight around their midsection, around their hips, around their arms, wherever it may be. And then again, that's a useful little tidbit of information to be like, oh, this is something I want to put a pin in and explore with more depth at some point. So weight gain is really a highly protective response by the brain to again insulate our internal vital organs. And simply put, our brain is like, let's create some sort of barrier between what Alyssa needs to stay alive, between something externally that I'm perceiving as very threatening. So, in many cases, when we are struggling to quote unquote lose weight, number one, the brain is highly resistant to weight loss. If anything, it actually likes to insulate, it likes that external body fat to kind of regulate body temp, to have our metabolism functioning, to have us, being in a space of reproductivity. So, the insulation is actually very, very much so a survival tool. It's just hard because I think sometimes it leads many people to feel at fault. Like, why is this diet not working for me? Why am I not losing the weight? And I often say that if safety is not threaded through your entire experience and your journey, you could be doing all the right things and your body will rebel and resist it. So, for pursuing weight loss, we want to pursue it in a way where you are actively making the best informed choices for your nervous system, for your lifestyle, for your community and your support system, so that it allows you to move through each phase of a potential weight loss journey with you feeling safe. And calorie restriction can feel very unsafe for a lot of people. It can spark anxiety, food obsession thoughts. It can make our digestive system kind of go a little haywire. So if we can approach weight loss from that perception of how can I do this in a safer way, that's going to be much more sustainable.
Yeah, and one of the other ones I've heard you talk about before is fatigue too,
Mm,
because when I think of like the things that the most common like main health concerns outside of like maybe PMS, like period problems, fertility, that sort of thing, but like the ones that always creep in for people are either weight loss resistance or weight gain and fatigue. And what could
mhm.
fatigue be telling us about our bodies?
Mm. I just recently talked about this on Instagram. The nervous system has four different kind of trauma survival responses. So we have like the fight response, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so the freeze response is this again, highly protective response by the nervous system to disassociate and numb when we perceive something that's really stressful or threatening around us. So I have a lot of clients that are big disassociators, meaning they kind of go off on what we call like a spaceship to disconnect from something that makes them feel really unsafe, whether or not that is an emotional feeling of like guilt or insecurity or judgment, that they detach. So if we're navigating a lot of these freeze responses, that is actually a very highly activated state by the nervous system because you are appearing very shut down on the surface, but internally there's a lot of activation, a lot of arousal. So over time, being in that kind of trauma response is very depleting. And so again, it's very fascinating because fatigue is often an invitation by your brain to be like, hey, we need to kind of rest right now. Like this might be a season of rest. We don't need to pursue goals. We don't need to like track our calories. What might be actually more supportive of our healing is being very smart and very, very smart from the standpoint of honoring that rest is also a very vital, vital like part of healing, like learning how to authentically rest. Some people might want to slow down, but their nervous system is uneasy with that change in how they've been orienting in the world, where stress has become something that they feel more attached to. So, fatigue, again, a very common thread because a lot of us have not navigated the world with a lot of stress in general.
And it's just like, I feel like you said in the beginning, like a brain-based approach is so compassionate, right? And it's
Mm,
when you hear it said that way, it's like, okay, well, maybe it's okay if I'm feeling tired versus thinking like automatically that, oh, I did something wrong. Something is off inside my body because I don't
mhm.
have any energy. And like, yes, if we're not eating enough and not getting enough sleep, of course, that's going to impact things. But I also think I see many women that feel like they're doing all the things right, and they're working at all these areas, and they're still dealing with fatigue. I'm like, this could be a season of rest, even though that can be really hard. Taking a step back from different things in your life, especially if you enjoy a lot of what you have going on, it can be really difficult. But I think it's important to notice like that could be like a nervous system response, and your body's trying to protect you and preserve.
Yeah, and a lot of people, like you mentioned, I think will often feel bad because they attribute it to failing or not succeeding when they are feeling tired and need to take quote unquote days off. But, again, such a important and essential component of healing is implementing rest periods for your nervous system to decompress, to even integrate new information, to just step outside of a healing process so that you can, again, decompress and allow your brain to kind of adapt to all the changes that you've been proactively working on.
That's a good point. Like, it's like maybe this is part of all the work that you've already been doing, and in response to
Mhm.
that, it's kinda letting, like, everything catch up. So that's technically the
Yeah.
freeze, because I know you have, like, the 4 trauma responses. So that's
Mhm,
freeze, like, if you're
mhm.
more, like, conserving energy. What are the other ones? I know there's, like, fawn and then 2
Yeah,
more.
so the fawn response is like the tendency to people please when you feel, again, stress in an environment. So you self-abandon and step into being the peacekeeper. Because at an early age, you probably identify that, let's say, for instance, your caretakers were in an argument. If you jumped in and were like, threw out a joke and or played the mediator, it diffused the situation and therefore you were able to access more safety. So as adults, we might find that we constantly are self-abandoning. We're constantly focusing on making sure everyone's okay. Like let's say at a party or something, you're like, how's everyone doing? And you're constantly bumping around the room, making sure everyone's okay. Meanwhile, you're like, I haven't used the bathroom, I haven't ate anything, right? And like you have self-abandoned so much of your core needs that over time, what ends up happening with a lot of my fawn responders is that they arrive at a place in their healing journey where they don't know themselves. They don't know what they need. They don't trust that they have an intuition. They often and frequently second guess themselves. When I do my check ins with them, I'm like, hey, how are you feeling today? A very normal response will be, I don't know. And so part of their journey is holding a lot of compassionate space for them to be validated. And this is a very normal, introductory phase into them relearning themselves and to provide them like the steps of like, how do we create embodiment? How do we create, body connection in a way where you can start to attune to those symptoms like pain, like anxiety and recognize patterns as a pathway towards relearning who you are and what you need.
I love that, and you have some great graphics on your Instagram for this,
Mm,
um, that goes through each one. When I read that when you first posted, I was like, "I'm the fawn." Like, if I get anxious, that's, like, my immediate, like, first I'm a middle child, so I feel like that's kinda, like,
me too.
normal,
Me too.
but I was like, "Oh, are you?" Oh, it's like
Yeah.
but it's only, like it's more in, like I don't know if it could be, like, a control thing, but it's like, yeah, if I get anxious and I'm in that state, like, that's, like, my automatic, because I feel comfortable there. And
Hmm.
one thing that I've learned from you that I really appreciate is to not necessarily feel bad for, like, what soothes you, especially, like, on your healing journey.
Hmm.
Um, but that's very interesting. And then I know there's, like, a
Hmm.
flight one. Um, what is that one? I feel like a lot of people are gonna this is, like, the type A
Yeah.
people.
So just to piggyback on what you just shared, nothing can be inherently wrong or bad if it has a track record of really helping you be safe and keep you alive. And so while we have all these quote unquote bad habits that we're actively trying to change in a healing process, right? Like I don't want to people please and not attune to myself and all these things. It's like, well, we have to also honor the fact that it served a purpose. So if we can hold compassionate space for this quote unquote habit we're trying to break, and utilize that as data to help move us in the direction of like, oh, not self-abandoning, acknowledging what we need, like that's like a much more
Yeah.
sustainable kind of trajectory for us. The flight response is definitely something I relate to as well. It is when we are moving like our stress and energy towards being productive. So when the pandemic hit, I'll just share a personal story. I built out a program. So when I was navigating a lot of unease with the uncertainty of the world, it was like, well, I'm just going to move all of that stressful energy into like producing a program. And many of the flight responders are busy bees. You'll find that you'll be like randomly organizing your inbox at like 10 p.m. when you're like logically, you're like, I should be sleeping, but you feel some sort of unease and you're self soothing by becoming overly productive. Yeah. So the flight responders will
I
rarely
think
respond
people could
well
relate
to.
to that.
Yeah, yeah. Flight responders will have a hard time being still. So, like, meditation can often feel more anxiety provoking. And they may walk away from a meditation or yoga class, like, thinking, like, I'm not good at it. I don't like it. And what I would rather kind of the perspective be is like, oh, actually, it just didn't meet me in this season of being like that flighter, right? That I need to move my energy. And sometimes that comes from like a walking meditation, right? You listen to maybe your walking meditation, or your meditation, but you take yourself on a walk. So there's better ways that we can
Mhm.
meet our nervous system's needs by understanding that we have these natural defaults. It doesn't make us wrong. It just makes us have a better be better at identifying what's going to better support us.
And I think that's, like, the big takeaway. It's like, there's no, like, best category. It's just kinda like wherever
Mhm.
you're currently at right now. What about the fight one?
Okay, so my fight responders are those that like often seek control. They're maybe a little bit more combative. And this really all stems from, again, we're looking at it from the perspective of like, it keeps you safe. It's a very protective mechanism. So when we think about control, a very common symptom I noticed with given the pandemic is, the brain relies on predictability as a means to allow us to feel at ease. And when the pandemic hit, there was like a lot of uncertainty in the world. And then, 2020 in general was just a very, very unsafe kind of year for many of us. That I saw old habits in clients start to resurface. They began to default to, restricting calories because they were trying to control their body because they could not control things outside of their body. So my fight responders are the control seeking. This could come up in like a calendar. This could come up in like needing to know all the details before you make a decision. This could come off as needing to quote unquote be right. And the need to be right is definitely the self protective tool of like, if I'm wrong, then that feels very threatening and scary to my nervous system. So,
I feel like I could probably relate to, like, multiple, like, I can see myself in a few of these. Um, but I'll be curious, so if you guys are listening, tag us and let us know which one you relate to. I'll put the link to the Instagram post in the resources, so if you wanna, like, swipe through and get the visual. I'm a very visual person, so I love when you make those. I'm always like, "Oh, this like, I can digest this information very easily." But let us know which
mhm,
one, 'cause I'm curious. Oh, it's I just think it's helpful to understand, like, oh, so that is, like, self-soothing to me. So if I see myself doing that, then it's just recognizing, like, maybe I need a little bit of support right now. One other concept that I love the way that you, like, phrase it is your nervous system and how you had a great post that it was just like your nervous system serves as your personal security system, and I was like, "What a nice
mhm.
way to, like, think about it and to have a better understanding of it." I just I was like, "Oh, okay, like, that makes so much sense," because again, it's like we're kinda always trying to change everything and, like, change the habits, whereas I really like how you encourage people to lean into it as well. So what do you mean by that? That our nervous system is our own personal security system?
Yeah. So, the nervous system is constantly scanning our environment to answer that one question: how safe am I? And so when the nervous system is hardwired to look for, danger and things that may be threatening to our survival, it's going to alert us. And so that surveillance system is that scanning, that constant scanning. We walk into a grocery store, we're scanning for danger. We walk into like a crowded mall, we're scanning for danger. So it is just so reflexive and so intuitive by the brain. If we carry trauma or experience trauma, what ends up happening is we become very vigilant of this scanning mechanism. So it's almost like we're so focused on like scanning for something that is threatening that may not be threatening. That part of our work is going to be learning the tools of the nervous system so that we can relearn that we no longer have to only look for danger. We can actually look for safety. So we can look for safety in a grocery store, right? Like, oh, I'm going to take that path down that aisle because there's less people. And, so we can start to orient and gently shift that hypervigilance of like, oh my God, this is threatening, this is dangerous, da 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 da, towards like, wow, okay, like let's orient towards like that comfort, that safety, and that ease. But again, trauma kind of like changes our lens in a way where it makes us feel more preoccupied or more on alert, I should say. So we can utilize that lens as a very, very helpful supportive tool. And as you mentioned, right, it's like, how is our body and brain really working for us versus the narrative of like, I always feel my body's rebelling against me or working against me. It's like, oh, what if we flip that and ask like, oh, what is she trying to tell me right now?
And I think one of the concepts that really helped me understand this and just like how we kind of get here in the first place is the threat bucket analogy that you use. So, and I know we
Mhm.
have a freebie, I believe, for people that they can download. So I'm going to link that so they can get the nice visual of the threat bucket, go through the exercise themselves. But can you talk about like what is our threat bucket and, how is that helpful when you're on that healing journey?
Yeah. So, threat is basically the neurological word for stress. So, what I would like for everyone to kind of envision is that every day you start off the day with your own personal threat bucket. So, you're either the bucket itself or you're kind of carrying a bucket. And throughout the day, this bucket basically fills with different threats. And when we look at what options threat could be, it could be your own personal health history. So maybe you sprained your ankle in the past, you have had surgery sites, you have tattoos, you have, yeah, any type of trauma that you carry in your own personal health history that already adds into your bucket. So when we add a threat into the bucket, it makes the bucket a little bit heavier. So you can picture you're adding either like sand or rocks or water into your bucket. And then as you move through the day, again, your brain is doing that internal, like that surveillance system of scanning your environment for threats and danger. Let's say, for instance, you had a really tough interaction with your partner and you had a difficult conversation and you left feeling like not connected, a little activated and uneasy. So you're then adding more threat into this bucket as you move through your day. Then let's say you had something for lunch that made your own body have an inflammatory response. Again, there's so many nuances to nutrition. We want to honor that all of us digest and process things very uniquely. So you ate something that your body basically did not enjoy, and so it added more weight to your threat bucket. So throughout the day, we're picking up all these threats. And when our threat bucket gets too full, based off of, again, all these perceptions by our own nervous system, the common output when our bucket gets too heavy is going to be pain. So if you envision that you're carrying this threat bucket, there's a little spigot, and the spigot outputs pain. When I when we think about utilizing this lens, the nervous system's main behavior change tool is going to be pain. It's the loudest output. It's the biggest thing that'll get us to pause and at least ask ourselves, or I should say, it's going to make us pause and change some sort of behavior. So when our threat bucket gets really heavy, we'll commonly have pain. Pain is also very personal. So someone might have a headache, someone might have lower back pain, someone might get digestive discomfort, someone might have anxiety. So we all have our unique pain expression. And what it helps people conceptualize is that, pain lives in the brain. And when we carry too many threats, our brain will try to grab our attention and it will signal some sort of pain symptom. And our goal is to stay curious and explore what about our threat bucket might have contributed to this pain pattern. It then gives us a lot of different options to help address the one symptom. So if it was like a difficult conversation with a partner, could you call them and have a conversation to hash things out? And does your headache go away? If it was the fact that you sprained your ankle and that has, as we're going to probably talk about, it created a blurriness around your movement and sensory map. Can you do some ankle mobility? Can you do some breathing mechanics that allows that to be less of a threat in your bucket? So it gives us a lot of these different dials to help us address one symptom.
And I feel like it's so helpful to just think about, even to just conceptualize in a day, right? Like, and like, yeah,
Mhm.
the idea of thinking about filling your threat bucket in a day is a lot less overwhelming than thinking about, ooh, how much has this threat bucket been filled my whole life? Right. So yes, you
Oh,
have that like portion of it that's filled from your health history, but also even just having that like, okay, but what can I do in this moment and right now to help relieve some of this pain, however that might be showing up for someone. I feel like it makes it just seem more doable.
yeah, totally. And I think that, to start a healing process can feel very overwhelming, especially if you're filling out an intake form and it's asking you, like, what have you experienced? What have you tried already? That it's like, well, wow, where do I start? And I think just asking yourself the question of, like, oh, what's in my threat bucket today gives us a much more authentic answer. Because it can often make us pause and think about, like, all the other areas in our life that are registering, that our brain is registering as stressful, and how our body and brain are communicating to us, like, hey, Alyssa, like, you need to, like, slow down and rest. Like, don't move into your flight response and, like, frantically clean your place. Maybe you need to lay down and, like, do some deep breathing.
Yeah, and I like the word threat too, because I feel like stress is so heavy and also utilize it's just used so much. We I feel like we're constantly bombarded with the idea of stress, with how we need to minimize our stress, how stress leads to all health issues, so I like the idea of like using the word threat instead. And it's a nice
Mhm.
little reminder of like it is a threat because that's how our body's perceiving it, and that's we have this nervous system that's constantly scanning and trying to protect us.
And I think it, like, helps people understand that, like, my own threat bucket will look very different than your threat bucket. How your brain perceives threat will be different than how my brain perceives threat. And so it allows us to really honor, like, how unique each of us show up every single day, and how unique our own perception of safety and threat and danger are from one person to the next. So as we are moving through a healing process, it helps us honor, like, yeah, like, our programming will probably look very different person to person, because my brain is just perceiving things so differently than the person next to me.
And you mentioned brain maps a little bit. I
Mhm.
wanna go into this and just kinda go through, like, what is a brain map? How and you mentioned, like, clear brain map versus, like, a little bit of a fuzzy one. What is a brain
Mhm.
map, and, like, how do you utilize those with your clients?
Yeah. So you'll probably, like, I'll maybe make sure that you have the infographic as well for, like, what I kind of described as, like, these blurry brain maps. So your nervous system has both a sensory and movement map. It also has a gut map. So you want to think about this as your own personal GPS system. And so we utilize this GPS system to help us feel safer in the world. As I mentioned, the nervous system relies heavily on predictability. So if our brain map is blurry due to trauma, injury, all of those aspects, it impacts our ability to predict how safe we are. So as a result, we might move slower, we might move with more caution, we might have more pain as a result of, again, these maps being very blurry. So what I would like for you guys to visualize is if there was like a stencil drawing of your body, and is drawn in pencil, and you start to recall the things that have happened to you. So it's like, oh, I sprained my left ankle. You get the eraser and you erase your left ankle. You're like, oh, like I'll just start naming the things that happened to me. I slammed my left finger in the car door, so I start to erase my left pointer finger. I had a concussion, so I start to erase a portion of my skull. And so over the years, I've experienced a ton of trauma. And we also want to understand that trauma is also non-binary. It's very nuanced. So things like gaslighting, bypassing, bullying, all of that can also factor into it impacting our map system. So when we take a look at our stencil drawing and explore our own trauma and our health history, we start to see like, wow, I've got a lot of blank spots in my body. And with the more blank spots we have, what ends up happening is, again, we'll probably carry more pain. We'll probably have more anxiety as a result of not trusting or attuning to where our body parts are. We will probably feel uncoordinated. We probably won't be as confident in going on adventures like hikes or trying out new sports because we don't know how to move these specific body parts because those movement maps and sensory maps are pretty blurry. So part of my work is helping each student understand that this is very normal, right? We all carry trauma. And what are the specific brain-based tools and therapies that we can do that help clear up these blurry movement maps? So there's a ton of like vision therapy that allows us to start to perceive the world a little bit more clearly, to repair these maps. There's joint mechanics, there's specific breathing tools. Things like tattoos and scars are impacting our map system as well. So can we sense heat? Can we sense cold? Can we sense sharp or dull sensations? Because all of those sensations feed into our nervous system. And when we have a tattoo or scar, what we might notice is that we can't feel that part of our body. So that part of our movement and sensory map is also very blurry. So again, it's just a really great way for us to understand like how we're showing up could be just attributed to all these things that have not been properly rehabbed.
And so you mentioned the vision therapy. Why does this brain-based approach focus so much on you mentioned like breath work and everything as well, but specifically with our vision, how does that help?
Yeah. So, it's what's really, really interesting is the fitness and health space, they often train everything from like the neck down, right? So it's like shoulders, hips, core, and yet they ignore everything from the neck up. And yet everything from the neck up is so close to the brain. So it makes conceptual sense to be like, well, why aren't we like moving our tongue? Why aren't we like training our olfactory nerve and like moving our eyes and our inner ear? Because anything closer to the brain can have a much more profound impact on our healing. So our visual system think about it this way, it's our brain's first window into the world. So how we are utilizing our visual system, it's not from the standpoint of acuity, right? I can see clearly. It's also how well can my eyes move. When our visual system is working well for us, it often has a drastic reduction in pain. It often has a drastic reduction in anxiety, and it often can improve things like performance, like posture is a great example. Because if we can utilize our visual system as what it's designed to do, we will naturally feel safer in the world. We will naturally have a much more predictive map. And again, having a clear predictive map automatically helps us feel safer in the world. So we can think about how we have two eyes. Oh, what's that, Amanda?
And like that predictive nature helps with the nervous system response.
Right. So a lot of us, because we're on Zoom so much and our eyes aren't getting the proper exercise, what ends up happening is they're basically getting really good at being in an isometric contraction. So we're staring at our screens at the same distance, at the same height. You want to think about that is almost similar to you just holding an isometric bicep curl all day long, 8 hours a day. So over time, though, the bicep muscle will get shortened and it'll get more efficient at holding that contracted position. But what if you need to like reach down and pick up something from the ground, but your bicep is so contracted, you no longer have that range of motion? You'll probably compensate. You might use your other arm. You might have pain develop in that bicep as a result of holding that tension. And whenever we hold excessive tension, that automatically puts us more in that survival state. So we want to think about pain and tension and discomfort as again those windows by the or those symptoms by the nervous system to grab our attention to be like, hey, like I'm not feeling that safe. Like, can we do something that decompresses the bicep, decompresses our visual input so we can actually ground and relax? From a place of relaxation is where we can actually access healing. So for a lot of the work I do, it's teaching clients how to get out of that survival mode, getting out of those trauma responses so that they can access feelings of safety and then heal and rewire.
I love that, and I think everyone can relate to that right now, especially people that I mean, I don't know a ton of people that don't have jobs that require them to be behind a screen, at least for part of it, you know? I mean, I know there's plenty of people that maybe don't relate to that, but I think a lot of us now, especially after the pandemic, do because we kinda had to switch to working behind a computer a lot more, working from home, like, less breaks to kind of get up and walk around the office and, socialize with people. And it's I remember when I first heard you explain that it's like holding that same position with your eyes, and it does create that like stress response. That's why I know like when I've been on my computer for too long. It's like it's not just the
Mhm.
work. It's not just like, "Oh, I need a work break." I'm like, I need like a whole brain break so that you can like
Totally.
decompress and relax. Because I think, like, obviously, we hear a lot about blue light now and screens and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and I'm sure that there's, like, a big component with that as well, but even just holding that same visual kind of position all day, most days, I don't think
Mhm.
we realize how much that can impact our overall nervous system.
Totally. And, when I start to introduce vision therapy to my clients, it's pretty remarkable, like how much of a conversation that does start with the body from the standpoint of if we just move our eyes off of our screen up to the right, we might feel like, wow, this feels like a stretch on my eyes. And that's actively you stretching your eye muscles, which when we think about it, wow, every muscle likes, needs that kind of like elongation, needs that stretching, that mobility. So we don't want to forget about our eyes, especially if that's the first window into our ability to perceive safety. So when we are, exercising our eyes, it is such a wonderful way for us to be like, wow, that feels tight. And if I understand that tension correlates to survival mode, wow, if I can, do my vision therapy, reduce the amount of tension I'm actually experiencing, will that have a wonderful domino effect on my anxiety, on my digestion, on my ability to be productive at work, and my ability to like think clearly? It's like these wonderful side effects that happen from really us reducing the amount of tension we carry every single day.
And one thing I'm curious about is, like, I'll have people randomly start to develop, like, inner ear imbalances and
Mhm.
issues. What and they've never dealt with it their whole life. Um, what is that? What can that be related to?
Oh, okay. So the inner ear is so fascinating. I feel like in the last couple months, I've had way more clients develop inner ear disturbances, I would say. And what we want to understand about the inner ear is that it is our primary balance system. So a well integrated inner ear allows us to understand where is up, where is down. When we have an inner ear that's not well integrated, we will often be someone that struggles with motion sickness, that easily gets nauseous, that frequently maybe is like clumsy and or doesn't have great balance. So you might hate lunges, you might hate certain yoga poses and feel like you're not good at them when really it's just like a stability component of the inner ear. Um, Frequently with someone with an inner ear also has a high pain threshold, meaning yeah, it's usually that they can tolerate a high degree of pain, and that's just the way that it feeds into different parts of the nervous system. Um, Inner ear clients are also it. There's been research around how it's correlated to gut health as well. So if I look at someone's health history and they're talking a little bit more about, like, I've done the food sensitivity tests, I've done all these kind of like fasted diets, yet I'm still chronically bloated, and as a result I have anxiety. What I want to help them entertain is those different dials of the nervous system of how we can address this one issue. So I may, instead of looking and analyzing their food, we can look at, like, well, how is your balance system working? How's your inner ear working for you? Is it not working for you? And how do we create the adequate therapy to help you reintegrate it? As you and I know, a lot of people have had some exposure to antibiotics, and antibiotics basically deteriorate the inner ear hair follicles. So post antibiotic usage, a lot of clients will end up feeling more unstable in their body. And when you think of feeling unstable in your own body, that is so threatening, right? That makes you feel very, very unsafe. So you may no longer want to, again, you may start to remove movement options from your library because you start to feel unstable in your own system. So the inner ear plays such a huge role in so many different facets. And when we can understand how integrated it really is, and then provide ourselves the right type of therapy tools, it provides us much more options to feel more connected to our body and, again, more safe.
I had no idea about the antibiotics in the inner ear. Like I've
Yeah.
never realized that. That's amazing, and it shows you how connected everything is. And I
Totally.
asked about the inner ear thing because I do feel like people view it as separate, like as a whole. And same thing with like vision issues. Like it's like a whole
Yeah.
separate issue when in reality it's really not.
Yeah, you want to, I mean, the biggest thing is like really thinking about your healing process as an entire ecosystem of like visual input, vestibular input, and what we call proprioception, which is your awareness in space. So that often looks like, learning how to breathe, learning how to move your body. But if we have three circles of those, modalities, and they all intersect in the middle, that's what creates a very safe, grounded nervous system and a safe body that experiences the world. If we only had like visual input and vestibular input, or training, I should say, we may lack feeling grounded in the world, because we are lacking the proprioception, the movement map of our like how we orient in the world. If we only had proprioception and visual input, we may feel unbalanced, quick to nausea, motion sickness. We hate flying, we hate roller coasters. If we only had vestibular, and proprioception, we may have a high level of pain because, again, visual input is correlated highly to, reduction in pain. So these three systems are so, so incremental in helping someone, number one, treat their whole healing process from a much more whole human approach. And then again, creating very sustainable changes in the process.
It's such a cool way to think about the nervous system too. I feel like now people are learning a lot more about their nervous systems naturally. It's being talked
Mm,
about more, um, which is amazing. But sometimes it almost can feel like, you know how when you were describing like different states, like fawn, freeze, flight, fight, like it almost can feel
mm,
like, but what do I do? Like what can I
mm,
actually do if I'm like stuck in this stage? How do I get out of it? So I just feel like understanding how the brain impacts it and noting those like three main systems and components of healing that can be really helpful. It's just cool. That's why I think I love the idea of the brain-based approach, and like learning more about it is so interesting because it's like, okay, so maybe you just have these like blurry brain maps, and we can kind of understand like where your body's coming from because she's been trying to protect you and keeping you safe, being your personal security system this whole time. And then just like slowly and gently addressing the different areas with actual like exercises that you can do. I don't know. As someone that's very like, I like to have a plan and a specific approach and know why I'm doing something. To me, I'm like, ooh, that's like comforting. That's like a comforting way to like kind of approach that
yeah.
healing process.
Yes. Yes. Especially when, again, if you've kind of exhausted a lot of other methods of like trying to understand and connect to your body, it's like, well, if we utilize, our own intuition and nervous system as our guide, it actually provides us a lot of feedback. We could sit down at our computer and be like, wow, my back always is tight when I sit down at my computer. Well, that's helpful information for us to then understand, like, okay, is it the fact that you're staring at artificial blue light and your eyes aren't moving? Is it the height of your chair, right? It gives us some sort of pathway to better understand what type of support and therapy you would need in order for you to not experience back pain. And to honor the fact that pain is always, again, that signal for us to push pause and address something.
Yeah, and I feel like so many people are gonna relate to that, and hopefully, I mean, even as whenever you talk, I feel like I get so many, like, aha moments of, like, "Oh, yep, I can totally relate to that." This is definitely, like, the first thing that comes to
Mhm.
mind when I think of, like, pain for myself, especially if people don't necessarily feel like they have pain. And they're like, "No, I haven't dealt with, like, chronic pain," but then when you mention those, like, little examples, like, even, like, how your back hurts when you sit down, like, to work or something, I think we can all kinda relate to that, or even, like, having, like, your balance and stuff be off. Like, they're just, like, little signs from your body that something is out of balance, and you could support it
Mhm.
in specific ways.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping that's really comforting for people, and that instead of them feeling like they
Mhm.
need to, like, fix and rebalance their nervous system, it's more of, like, understanding where your body is right now, evaluating,
Mhm.
looking at your threat bucket on a regular, hopefully daily basis to better understand what can you do based off the response that your body's giving you. Um, but yeah, I think I'm very excited to hear everyone's feedback from this
Mhm.
episode and what they learned. And I really appreciate you being here and sharing all your knowledge and your brain wisdom with us. Is there anything that you want to leave people with?
I think just to piggyback off of what you shared, I think by understanding like how the nervous system does work, it allows us to remove a lot of those judgmental thoughts, like, what's wrong with me? This is my fault. I am defective. Like some of those narratives that would naturally come up when we're trying to fit into different health programs or different, kind of like methodologies, when we can like approach it from that neuroscience lens of like, wow, like I am innately very wise and very smart, and my brain is always trying to protect me. It provides you much more compassion to like be validated in the way that you are surviving, in the way that you are self-soothing. Just because you're cleaning your apartment late at night doesn't mean that there's anything quote unquote wrong. It just means that, wow, you're feeling uneasy and your brain has determined this is the best solution to self-soothe. And in that point, we can make the honest decision of like, I'm going to keep cleaning, and, or, okay, I'm going to stop cleaning and maybe I'll do something different. But it's really empowering, to understand that like we do have all of these tools inside of our body, whether it's visual input, whether it's training the inner ear, whether it is understanding that emotional stress has the same impact on our threat bucket as, lack of sleep. It's such a wonderful journey of exploring yourself, and getting really in conversation with your body, that at the end of this, you're going to be like so much more in tuned, and you'll finally embody what intuition really feels like, because you have allowed yourself to guide yourself back to what your body can feel like, which is like a very safe home to be in.
I love that, and isn't that the goal of the healing journey? To, like, feel safe in your body and to feel like you have the tools, 'cause we're always looking
Yeah.
at outside sources to tell us, like, what to do and
Mhm.
what's the best approach, and obviously, like, we have to gather the tools and the knowledge and the exercises to be able to address it, but I think just having that really nice reminder that, "Hey, you already have all those tools, now it's just learning how to use them." I love that, it's so
Mhm.
beautiful. So if you guys are not following Alyssa, follow her on Instagram at Coach Alyssa Chang. I'm gonna link everything, her Instagram, her website, and that threat bucket, in the show notes, and I will get, like, that brain map visual from you so we can have that
Yeah.
as well, and yeah, I just can't thank you enough for being here, and I hope everyone enjoyed this.